Teach your children well. Their father's help did slowly go by, and feed them on your dream.
And we're live.
All right.
So everyone, my special guest today is a friend of mine I've known for quite a while. Her name is Christina McDaniel. She's the assistant professor of science. I have my little cheat sheet right here. She's the assistant professor of science, tech, and teaching at education at Bradley University, and co-director for STEM Center of Education at Bradley. And Christina does lots of research into all different facets of educational teaching, including studying race and autism and different issues of science teachers. But Christina, tell us what you do and how you do it and where you do it.
Awesome. So I'm here in Peoria, Illinois at Bradley University. And one of the things that is my true passion is to create inquiry-based science teachers that will go out into the classroom and teach through inquiry. And so that's my main passion here with my students, but then also to do research to try to find new ways to incorporate STEM into the classroom, to figure out what makes STEM tick in the classroom, what makes it part of the normal curriculum and where it should be part of the normal curriculum, but also tried to find gaps, areas in which science is lacking or types of science are lacking, or for example, with the autistic children of autism, we're just now starting to research with that here at Bradley in science and seeing ways that we can incorporate STEM and hopefully address some of those sensory perception issues that students have, because children with autism are very hands-on, and they colors and sounds and things like that can really disturb them or bother them when they are trying to focus. And so STEM and STEM toys are a way in which we can allow them to have that fun that you can have in inquiry with science. And so that's one of the things that I'm working on investigating right now. So just one of the many things.
Why is kids learning science in school important, and how old should they start learning it, do you think, and why?
So I think the learning of science is cognitive. You can only give them the opportunity to experience science at their learning level, at what they are capable of doing, because their brain develops in different ways. So for example, K through 5, really K through 3, really needs to be hands-on stimulus, discovery type of science. You're giving them things to explore, connecting it to their community, to their environment, to what they see every day. And then as you get older, up in the grades, they can begin doing experiments that they design. They can begin discovering things maybe that we have never known before. A lot of high school students, are involved in things like science fair projects or even investigations in their own home. We actually have a STEM school here in Peoria that I've been working with. It's a 5th through 8th grade school. And one of the things that they are doing is creating community partnerships with STEM. And so there's a problem out there in the real world. And maybe it's the water system here in Peoria and the way it dumps into the Illinois River. And they are trying to find ways to keep the pollution to a minimum. And these are 5th through 8th grade students doing that. So I think when you ask me, what impact can science have? Why do students need to learn science? I think this answers the question, because every day they are going to have a situation they're faced with that maybe an experience they had growing up in the educational system, they learned a portion of it that they can apply to their real life and make it a better world for them, but also for their community, and allow them to become really good, productive citizens.
That's a really great question, great answer. And yeah, it seems like science has an advantage in a sense with kids, because a savvy science teacher can give many compelling reasons for buy-in for the kids. Do you want your rockets to go to Mars? Do you want your planes not to crash? And do you want your cars to go faster and be cheaper? All of these, and do you want your mom to be healed from her disease? All of these questions are answered by science, right?
Right.
And there's really nothing else that really answers those questions. So I think that's compelling. At the same time, what do you find that there in the public imagination or in the public sphere, there is a misconception of what science is?
Oh, yes, definitely. And I think, I think I mean, we can go back to the age-old question, why do I have to know this? You know, am I just learning this because I have to learn content? And two, I think there's also a mistrust in the public with science, especially in the climate we are in today. And so I think that in the education, well, let me back up. I think in the education system, if we have our students become more familiar with science and what it can do for them, I think we take that away and we take the mistrust away and the perception of science as being tough or difficult away, because they can begin to see themselves as a scientist. I mean, even to the guy who drives the garbage truck going down the road, he can be a scientist as well. And I mean, there's all different kinds of ways that we can actually see ourselves as a scientist. And I think that's very important. And I think if we do that with our students in K through 12 education, then we have taken away that mistrust of science some.
So you're saying democratize it, bring it down to a kind of granular level, and let students know, not in a kind of chintzy kind of fake way, that whether they like it or not, they're already a scientist. Maybe not a great scientist, but they're on their path of being a scientist, and they can only get better at it. Is that what you're saying?
Right. And the age-old thing, whenever I ask my students here at Bradley who want to be science teachers, what does a science teacher look like? So there's this whole study out there called Draw a Scientist, where they asked over 2,000 people to draw what a scientist was, all the way from kindergarten all the way up to older. And you know, I can't remember the exact percentage. It was a huge percentage, and 80–90% drew the man with the white crazy hair and the lab coat and the goggles and looked like Einstein. And everyone envisions that as a scientist, when in reality, that's not. I mean, of course, that is a scientist. Einstein was a great scientist, but there are others out here. I mean, I'm looking outside my window right now, and I see the guy spraying the chemicals on our bushes outside right now. Well, he is a scientist as well. He had to mix some chemicals to get them together to spray. He had to know exactly what, I'm assuming it's a fungus, because I see the rose bushes out here have fungus. So he's, you know, had to know exactly what chemical to use for that. That is science, and that's real world science, down to the little old lady who has the rose bushes out in her yard who needs to take care of those. So I think we need to take away that, oh my goodness, science is so hard and it's only for the brilliant. It's not. Science is for everyone. And that's the vision that I have for my teachers, my pre-service teachers here at Bradley, is to teach them that. So when they are teaching and creating lessons, they are creating it for everyone in their classroom.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. When you were talking about that, I was thinking about who is the priest who had the peas? I forget his name right now.
Gregory Mendel?
Yeah, Mendel. And Mendel was basically like one of the foundation stones of science, right?
Right,
but
right,
for genetics. Simple man, growing peas, asking simple questions, and figure out ways to verify hypotheses, right?
Right.
And so it brings to, he had no expensive equipment. He had peas in a pod and time to grow them and watch them, right? So it's interesting to me that science isn't, the reason why I asked you what the public imagination, what they think about science, it seems like science is less a compendium of doctrine. That if you believe this, you believe in science. If you don't believe this, you don't believe in science. Science seems to be more of a discipline of the mind, a kind of approach to thinking about the world. Is that, would you agree with that?
I do definitely agree with that. Right, it's a way of thinking. That's like the big verbiage that we use now. Science is a way of thinking, and it really is. One of the things that that I teach in my class is something called productive struggle. And I truly believe in productive struggle. Let me kind of tell you what I mean by this. So if I were to give students some wires, a light bulb, a battery, and a switch, and say, light it up, give them no instruction. So, and I do this with my elementary science method students. And
no pre-theory about current or DC or AC or anything like that. Nothing.
No, I give them no instruction. I just say, here it is, light the bulb up, that's your task.
Right.
Oh my goodness. Some of them like, oh, I've done this before. They got it done in 2 minutes. And then you've got several groups that have never had exposure to this before, have no idea what they're doing, but their thinking in their mind is pulling in all of their preconceived ideas and their funds of knowledge to try to figure it out. And a lot of them struggle. And finally, they're like, you got to give me some directions, Dr. McDaniel. And I'm like, I'm not giving you directions. Ask your neighbor, see if you can figure it out, problem solve. And when I get done, I talk to them about, okay, how'd that make you feel when you had that struggle? How did that struggle make you feel? Well, I don't like struggling. I like it when people give me instructions, and I'm like, well, okay, I understand that, but in life, do you always have instructions? You don't. You have to be able to work through that struggle and problem solve and get to the other end. Even though it wasn't pretty, even though there were a lot of mistakes along the way, and even though you felt a lot of frustration, when you got to the end and you lit up that light bulb, you felt very successful, didn't you? And then we talk about, creating that environment in our classroom for our students. So many times we're afraid to allow our students to fail. And our students in the K through 12 classroom, they have to fail periodically so that they can grow and learn and go the path they need to go. So I did a lab when I was a school teacher many years ago on enzymes, and we were taking the potato and putting iodine on it, and it colors the potato because the potato has starch in it. And all of a sudden my students were like, well, what other vegetables have starch in them? I'm like, I don't know. Let's bring vegetables in tomorrow. So they brought in vegetables, and we kind of made a chart of what we thought what would happen. And when they came in the next day, they had not made the analogy that most tubers have carbohydrates in them, and that's what turns the starch with the iodine turns it a color. And so they learned a lot by allowing that investigation to continue. And I could have said, no, that's not on the list of things we're going to do today, so we're not going to do that. Do that on your own time. But that was a great opportunity for me to allow my students to explore and go through that productive struggle in that. So
right. And
right.
We knew what starch was before we knew what carbohydrates were, right?
Exactly.
Because what the hell, carbohydrates require that you understand there's such a thing as an element.
Right.
And we discovered who discovered oxygen was the guy with the bird that killed birds.
Oh my gosh! Don't answer me that.
Yeah, the guy who
Lavoisier, maybe I don't really remember who it was.
He put birds in glass domes and made a vacuum to prove that air was a thing.
Right, because they're going to die.
Yeah, it's there. So, so we didn't know there was oxygen. Oxygen was discovered. Hydrogen was a discovered thing. So, of course, carbohydrate came much later than starch. We knew starch was there because you can make it into a powder, and then so you're testing for starch, right? I find that fascinating, and you could look at it historically, because you gave these kids some tools that were pre-developed, giving them a battery, for instance. So you didn't touch on base and acid yet, right? On different charges of a compound. It made me think. Funny enough, it made me think of Star Trek, the famous episode where Kirk has to fight this lizard creature. And the lizard creature is much more powerful than him. Do you remember this episode? Are you a Trekkie?
Yes, I do.
So to me, it was like my introduction to science. And more than any science in Star Trek, it was like basic science. What's Kirk going to do? He's getting killed by this guy. And you tell the audience what he found, what he figured out. It just was great.
Right.
He found saltpeter, right? Sulfur.
Right.
He found charcoal. Mm-hmm. And he made a crude little cannon, right? A little firearm. And he took 2 stones and made a spark. But so it was like he had to come up with the fire. He had to invent the firearm to fight this lizard. And I was thinking about that, like, well, your kids had it much easier than Kirk,
Yes, they did. They just had to go home and find some vegetables.
Yeah, no, but that's what scientists had to do. Can you imagine the first scientists had to figure out like how to make batteries, and they didn't know they were making batteries, but they figured out that if you have some vinegar, right, and you have some whatever a base compound would be in a wire, things were going on, right?
Right, that's right, like MacGyver.
Yeah. So, as a kid, I was drawn to, of course, the Carl Sagans, and Burke had a show called Connections on PBS. Where he'd show the whole history of science and technology and show how all these things were connected together. So the weaving loom was the forerunner of the computer, and he'd show how that is, and how. So there is excitement to be found in science education. You told me a lot of your pre-service teachers were leery about going into science education because they thought, because you said they have the problem of thinking science was what their teacher taught them, or the style.
It's too hard. That's the biggest thing I always got was it's too hard. I don't understand it. And I guess the thing that I tell them is, okay, maybe you don't understand the content, but that can be learned by a Google search. Honestly, you can learn that content by a Google search, but showing them how to use it and how to transfer that knowledge, that's the key thing. Allow the students to explore and create their own discoveries, and you guide them through it. And I use a big word, it's a buzzword in my class called facilitate. Are you facilitating your students, or are you teaching your students? If you're facilitating, you're doing the right thing because you're allowing them to guide their own learning. And when I say that, and I say guide your own learning, a lot of people go, but wait a minute, what's the teacher for? I thought the
Right.
teacher was supposed to teach. Well, yeah, they're going to have some direct instruction, but the teacher really needs to facilitate that learning. Give them a problem. Maybe they need to. One of the big problems was that cell phone and the EMF radiation from a cell phone might cause infertility. That was a huge buzz thing back a little while ago. So I did this with my middle school methods science teacher. I give them that challenge, and I said, create a project around that. Design a project for your students. And I mean, we had everything from web searches about research on it to students creating posters to talk about it, to one group came up with a way to prevent radiation from going into the reproductive areas by the casing around the cell phone. Well, I mean, they've proven that it's not enough radiation to cause infertility now, but that was a big buzz back then. And talking about that with your students, that made that application really real to students. So in that, they learned the content of what EMF radiation was, and they learned on how it affects the human body, the different tissues in the human body. So all that content was in there, but they didn't teach that to their students. The students learned it themselves. And so that, to me, is the key to having an inquiry-based classroom versus a lecture-based direct instruction classroom. The students learn much deeper about something and learn those skills and tools that they can take that activity they did and apply that in real life. So.
Yeah, and it does go to a deeper truth about human nature, doesn't it?
Right.
That Frank Lloyd Wright always said that everything he remembers he did in school, he built.
Yeah, I've heard that before. Yeah.
He was kind of an arrogant kind of guy, but there's a truth to it, right? And Einstein talked about these significant things that happened to him as a child, like his father, which isn't, in the history of great thinkers, this isn't unusual. Picasso's father was a great art teacher. Mozart's father was one of the greatest music teachers ever. And Einstein's father installed electrodynamo generators.
Oh,
so he
cool.
had these big, so he'd bring home these big magnets and plop them on the table. Then he'd give his son Einstein a compass, and the compass would go insane near the magnet.
Right, right.
And so, and he talked about later in life, like, I was completely flummoxed by this, and I didn't get good enough answers, as a kid. So his trajectory as a thinker started very, very young. And people like Bucky Fuller and a lot of people's trajectory started when they were in these horrible kindergartens. So for us, Heather and I, was proof that progressive education, where it's kind of student-directed, student-led, right, and autodidactic, where it's the self-learner, starts trajectories on these geniuses early. Maybe they're geniuses because they started so early. Maybe we're all potential geniuses. So I hear what you're saying, and I think it goes to a deeper truth about human nature, that people want to do it for themselves. They want to learn it for them. They want to be the executive function of making the connections in their brain, kind of.
Right, right. And we tend to always focus on, when you said geniuses, it made me think, we tend to always focus on creating geniuses, but only a small percentage of people are. And so I think by doing science the way that we're talking about, by creating lessons with teachers the way we're talking about, we're touching not only the geniuses and giving them the opportunity to go farther, but also those that have been struggling all along, and teaching them proper tools and ways in which they can alleviate their struggle. And so I think by allowing them to investigate in the direction that they want to go, they get that personal investment in it, and it really it speaks to whether they're going to love science or whether they're going to not love science.
Right.
Because if they're purposely vested in it, they're going to love what they're doing. I go back to, I had a student one time, and I tell stories, so I'm sorry if I'm telling too many stories, but I had a student one time that whose his uncle was a truck driver. And this student had to create a science fair project for me, and he had failed biology twice. So this was third time taking biology, and he was taking biology through me this time. And I said, okay, this is 25% of your grades, so we've got to rock this out. So what are you going to do? And he said, well, I have an uncle, who drives truck, and he talks about his ears popping all the time. And he said, I want to design something to quit that. So, I mean, he studied about the eustachian tube, he studied all the science behind why that was happening. And then he went and borrowed the old timey cell phones with the vibrators in them and got the vibrators out. He put them in a headset like this. And if the truck driver wore them while they were going up and down the hills, it had a vibration that caused the eustachian tube to wiggle back and forth. That was his theory. And so he had truck drivers when they were going up and down the mountains wear these things and talk about how many times their ears popped versus previous when they weren't wearing it. So just a simple little thing. I mean, the kid was fantastic and ended up going to state and international science fair with his project. So this kid who went from failing, who was a failing student, you know, he was a DF student all the way to going to International Science Engineering Fair and something that was really vested in. And so I think sometimes where science teachers and where the education system fails is trying to put students into this box and say, okay, you've got to meet this parameter or you're not going to be successful, instead of trying to find what will make that student successful themselves for themselves. And through that, I think they grow academically, but you've got to find what ticks for them. And oh my goodness, if you have, 30, 35 students in your class and you get another 35 or 35, the next period and the next period, next period, that's really hard for a biology teacher, chemistry teacher, physics teacher who might have, 150, 200 students to do that for every student. So
Right.
I think that's the challenge.
Yeah, and I think it gets back to even the narrative, like the marketing of it. Like, what does smart look like? And Star Trek didn't do us a favor by saying smart looks like a green man with pointy ears, right?
Right.
That really stuck, right?
Looks geeky.
Yeah, or a geek, an alien or a geek, right? Or
Right.
or a man robot like Data. So it was always somebody who's kind of robotic, or crazy with the long crazy hair, like the guy in the movie about time travel. What was that called? The Doc in Back to the Future. Yeah, right. You see, you get the stereotype, right?
Right.
So if we know, you said what scientists look like. What smart people look like. They're not all geniuses. They're people who just wanted to solve a problem, like why are my peas growing differently? And they don't have to be geniuses. They don't even have to have necessarily very, very high IQs. They can just be people who are like focused on a problem, who have the discipline and excitement to like want their car to go faster, and they become really good mechanics because they start taking apart engines when they're a kid. It's not that they're gifted in any necessary way, except that they had a kind of a frame of reference or a point of view, right? An attitude.
Right.
So it seems like it's a very democratic way of looking at it. Like science is open to you. It's kind of also their treasure too, isn't it? These kids, you have an inheritance more than what your parents own. It's this inheritance of being born in the 22nd century or 21st century, and it's all this science is yours.
Right.
We're telling you that you can tell what a star is made out of by a spectrometer, right? That we can tell, and because you know that, you have that power too to find out what something's made out of by the spectrum it makes. It's an amazing. But people think that's not really a gift for them, right?
Right.
But it is, isn't it, for all of us, really?
Right. And I truly feel too that science is a gift for us to make connections to other content. And I know. So I was just thinking, as you were talking about, one of the activities I do with my students is I have them build rockets, and we go outside. It's just a simple paper rocket, and we put it on the end of an air compression thing. It shoots it up in the air. And they go through design, airflow, lift, and all that kind of stuff. We talk about the science behind it. But one of the things we do is we incorporate math. And so you can have one person standing on 10 feet on one side, one person standing 10 feet on the other side. And we have this little paper thing that you can measure the angle.
Protractor,
is how high it goes, right? And then they do just graph it and do a cross placement and find, how high the rocket went. But I mean, that can be so much more. I mean, you could do things in technology with that. You could actually, there are apps on laptops where you can take a picture of it as it's occurring or film it as it's occurring, and it can figure it out for you. So much you can apply to that. It's just a simple science concept about lift of an object, but it can also go into math, and then maybe you could do a write-up on it, so you could incorporate English into it. And so I love this whole idea of creating these interdisciplinary units as well for students. I have a lot of different districts around here where I go in and I actually teach teachers to develop interdisciplinary units. I think that's really important too. So I know we focus on science a lot, especially with STEM, but I think we need to incorporate the other content in with it. And I think it really can develop from that. For example, like you could have an English teacher who is studying Dawn by Elie Wiesel, which is about the Holocaust and what Elie Wiesel went through in the Holocaust. So maybe, we're going to talk about in science about gas fixation and what that does, and talk about maybe like in the poultry industry or in other industries where they have to, gas certain animals for diseases or whatever, because they have to destroy them because they have a disease or whatever. It's all different kinds of ways and things this can apply into the real world. And it started with that English book, not with science. It started with English and then went into the other. So the connection is wide, I think, for incorporating science into everything in life, not just in the science box or the science window.
Right. I think kids love pretend, but they also hate fake. It's like a funny, kids are a funny combination like that. So you could make, I'm very interested in what you're saying, because you can give kids very authentic, real science to do that affects real world problems. So they're doing real stuff in the school. At the same time, they could imagine that they're doing it for a Martian colony that doesn't exist. But they'd be fine with that. But so it's like you have the power of imagination to work with kids, which is a huge ally, and you also have the ability to make the projects they're doing pretty real.
Right.
And when both of those are neglected in the school, you get the prison school. You get the boring school that's about the principle and the rules, right? And it just so I see those as like a twin kind of thing going on that helps the teacher make it magic for the kid.
And when I look back at like my education in high school, actually, and started in middle school, I had a 7th grade chemistry teacher in middle school who was fantastic and really did a lot of labs with us and really talked about, I grew up in Ohio, northwestern corner of Ohio, in cornfields. And so he really applied chemistry to crops. And so we really learned a lot because that was very applicable in our area. To my 10th grade biology teacher who loved fruit flies. And we did, cross-sex linked frost, with fruit flies. And just those little experiences that I had in life really shaped for me who I was going to be. So I think creating those opportunities for students is just pivotal. I mean, we have to, have those things in life that change us, that tweak us. And when I talk to my students about this, I'm like, what an awesome opportunity this is for you, because you are going to shape the future problem solvers by what you're doing in your classroom, by you allowing them to think and do and go their own way. You are creating our future scientists. And I get real goosebumps about it. I don't know if they do, but I do, because it's a huge responsibility. You can't just get in there and go by the textbook. That's, I throw the textbook out the window. It's good for a resource, but throw it out the window. Let's do real science.
Yeah, all my greatest science teachers, and I had a lot of them. I was really lucky. All I knew loved science, and they wanted to do science in the classroom. Mr. Dick in 6th grade, he had us bury all this stuff in the back of the school in the yard. I remember I put my leather belt in the ground in the fall. Cool. And in the spring, we dug it all up and saw what it all looked like to show how recycling works in the ground, right? What happens. So, cool. We're always doing real science. I remember even in college, and I wasn't completely won over yet on the trajectory of my life. And I remember Mrs. Linda Dybus, the chemistry teacher, biology teacher. She came back from her time away. What do you call the time away for
sabbatical?
Professors? She came back from sabbatical. She was studying microbiology, microorganisms. And she was asking a very simple question. It seems like stupidly simple. In fact, my English professor is the one who re-articulated the question she was trying to do. He said, when does a small little creature know that it's eating its environment and not eating its own lip and eating itself? Like, what's the triggering mechanism that says, this is what I want to eat, and I don't want to start biting on my lip and eat myself? Yeah. Like, without a nervous system, right? It's just a chemical response. Like, she was trying to figure out what is it to tell that, because that might relate to immunodiseases. It might relate to a lot of things. But it was such a soundingly stupid question. Like, why would you chew your own lip and start eating your face off, right? Right. But why don't we?
Right. That's true.
So so that blew my mind, and I thought about that I'm still thinking about that question. So those little nuggets, you don't know where they're going to come from, but it might just enter a kid's head and shake them into a trajectory for their whole life.
Right. On the campus of Mississippi State University, that's where I received my PhD, there is a biology professor. He might be in agriculture. I'm not exactly sure, but he goes by Dr. Brown is his name. And he had his students going out and taking samples from puddles out on campus, and they found a new amoeba. And
Oh,
I thought,
a
when I
novel amoeba that's never been cataloged.
a new amoeba, and I'm like, really? I mean, that we have so much in the United States and so much available to us, and here we even have things here that have not been discovered yet. And I thought that was absolutely amazing. And I think they even called it Brown's amoeba. Don't quote me on that. I'm not sure, but he was actually the neighbor to one of my friends. That's the only reason I know this story. But it's just amazing that, you know, those opportunities that are out there that we have not discovered yet at all.
One of my heroes is Ernst Haeckel, and he should be I think he should be a house. He should be a household name. And he was a contemporary of Darwin and Darcy Thompson, and he famously decided he wanted to be an artist. He was kind of a frustrated artist. He was in Italy. He's English. He went to Italy, and he was, I think, in the Amalfi Coast near Naples, around there, Sorrento. And the tidal pools around there are excellent places if you want to study aquatic life. So he started doing watercolors and ink drawings of aquatic life, and he got access to a microscope, and he started doing studies of radiolariae and these microbial sea organisms, right? And he was so good at it that when they did a great expedition, I think it was the Discovery. It was a world-around expedition of a boat would go around the whole world, the British Empire. It got samples from the bottom of the sea from all the seas of the world, and they brought it back to the I think it was Cambridge, and they said, who's gonna unpack all this stuff and document it? And we didn't have photography. Who's gonna draw pictures of all these microbes? And they said, oh, that Haeckel guy should do it. So he discovered by himself half of the known radiolariae to this day, the diatoms. And his artwork was unbelievable. But here's a story about an artist who became one of our greatest naturalists just by looking through a microscope and drawing pictures of what he saw. And I still don't know why people don't know about him, because to me, he's more interesting than Darwin in some ways, because it's such a story of you could take an art skill and the skill of just having wonder at life and turn it into become a monster of natural science, you know?
Oh, yeah.
So yeah,
that's amazing.
He's one of my heroes.
That's amazing.
So you were saying that we were talking about how there's a shortage right now of science teachers, and why do you think that is, and what can we do to address it?
So that is a huge question, and it's packed with so much different areas. But I think the general gist here at Bradley is that students that, for example, that want to become a biology teacher, a chemistry teacher, a physics teacher, if they take all these biology, chemistry, physics courses or science courses, whatever science courses they're taking, they have so much science that they can actually, their degree is actually in their content area. Education is the second part of it. And so they can make a whole lot more money.
If they don't teach.
And have a whole lot more opportunities out there with a degree in STEM than what they do with a degree in education. So the degree in education is a little bit limiting in amount of jobs that are out there, but also limiting in the amount of money that they can, build a family on. And so that's our biggest pull, or our biggest pull away from education for science teachers, math teachers, both. We have oodles of English and history teachers, which are fantastic, because I'm not going to negate them. We need them as well. But for some reason, the science especially is really low. And one of the things that we have tried to do here at Bradley is take a look. And I think that you have universities across the United States that are doing this right now, taking a look at our curriculum and seeing if the content courses that we're having them take in biology, chemistry, physics, if those are actually necessary. So for example, would a high school teacher need a senior level physics course? Probably not. Would they need, I'm probably going to get a whole bunch of trouble for this. And I'm not saying physics is not good and chemistry is not good and biology, because I'm a biologist, but I think that we need to be real about it and look into making it so that they have more courses like science inquiry, because that's really where it's at for a teacher. So I think restructuring curriculum at the university level needs to be a first, but also creating incentives for people to go into science. So we have things like, I know in the Mississippi Delta right now, they have an incentive where if you go teach in the Delta, they will give you a certain percentage more worth of money. So teaching at high risk places or places that do not have a lot of teachers. So there are incentive programs out there. I know there's one here in Illinois similar to that as well for rural schools because they do not have enough teachers, enough high excellent teachers. We also have here at Bradley, we have Golden Apple Scholars, and Golden Apple Scholars will teach here in the Peoria area or in or at-risk areas in Illinois. So there are programs that are out there to try to pull teachers students to teaching. There's another program. I think it's all about programs and creating programs that will bring, teachers back to education or students back to education. I don't have the answer
But
for
yeah,
what will make it successful. I just think we just need to keep trying to show them what benefits they can have and how they can actually change, the trajectory of children. And I guess
right.
it's a
Yeah.
passion you have to have, I think.
Yeah, and unfortunately, the '60s did give us lots of hippies, and a lot of hippies
Yes.
went into teaching, and they made great teachers. I mean, hippies make great teachers, and we don't have hippies anymore as much like we used to. I mean, I'm being facetious, but I really kind of mean that in the sense that now it's the dollar that drives
Right.
people, and
It is.
rightfully so in some respect. You have to understand, like, if somebody comes from a historically poor family, like I think of a minority family, right? And it's their first kid that goes to college, why would he take on this kind of debt and then go into a job that won't be able to pay that debt off for maybe 20 years or 15 years? He won't be able to get a house. Or I'm saying a he right now because there's probably a bigger shortage of male teachers too, right? And
Correct.
he won't be able to be a breadwinner to the level he'd like to be. So, but there's ADM right across the street asking your biologist, we'll give you a starting salary. It's double what the schools are offering, right?
Right,
And,
right.
and a pretty good career safety. And you're in an industry that you could go and move to other companies. So it seems like a no-brainer for a lot of people. Even I've heard there's even shortages of finding good research people because you get your degree in biology, for instance, right? And if you go work for some professor at the university, you're teaching all the professor's classes, right? You're being paid next to nothing, right? And you have all this debt.
Right.
But again, you could work for ADM or some big company and make money. So they can't so it seems like we set the system up to fail in that regard.
And even as a professor, I could go out and work in the industry and make 2 to 3 times what I'm making right now. And so I think you have to find people who have a passion for teaching first. And then I think the content comes second, because if you don't find that passion for teaching, it's not going to work. And I know, so I can speak to several institutions that I've been at. I've been at institutions. Well, let me back up. I think it comes to finding the people who like to teach, period, first. That's where it goes back to. So you have universities who do not do any kind of field experience until junior and senior year in college. I think that's wrong. Here at Bradley, we start them as freshmen. We put them in, and this is the first university I've been at that's like this, and I have seen this with my own eyes change people's lives, because you have people who have the idea of what they think teaching is like. You put them in that classroom for the first time, and all they're doing is observing, and they're like, oh my gosh, I don't want to be here.
Right.
And then you have some who go in and, oh my goodness, I love it. That's exactly what I want to do. And I want to be in the inner city schools. That's where I'm needed. That's where I fit. Or no, I think I want to be in a rural school. So I think by starting them out early, and we also have teacher education programs in high schools. I think they're called Teacher Academy. Don't quote me on that. But I've seen some teacher academies where students start as juniors and seniors in high school, and they can actually get some college credit coming into universities for education courses. And they're usually taught by instructors from local universities. And so I think that's a really good way, to get more teachers. But it goes back to how many of those in that teacher academy are high school teachers, first of all. Very few of them are going to be high school teachers. Most of them are elementary. And how many of them are going to be science? And there's still very few. And so I even look at my own children. My youngest daughter, she's going to be a chemistry education major, and already she's talking about being a pharmacist or being, a chemist and going away from education. So, I want my child to do what she wants to do to make her happy in her life, but I'm seeing that in my own children, that things where they can actually go out and make more money for their family versus being a teacher. I think here in Illinois, I believe it's $40,000 starting pay for teachers. Don't quote me on that. It's close to it. Versus coming out and getting a chemistry job at $85,000. So that is just the huge disparity, I believe.
Right, and the talent tends to be pulled in that direction too.
Right.
So
exactly.
you're gonna, So how would you rate the level of? I know you said the teachers should be facilitators, that they don't have to be but they do have to be knowledgeable. Right. They have,
exactly.
and you can't really be excited about science if you're not knowledgeable about it. You can't just fake that kind of excitement. Right. So how would you? How do you fix? We live in the real world, right? So we can't just fire all the teachers and start from scratch. We have to deal with what we've got. What is the best kind of triage remedy you would suggest to fix the world as we have it right now, in terms of making the quality of the teaching better, the quality of the learning better, the quality of the school better? How is it done? How do you fix something like that if you think it needs to be fixed?
Well, I think that the education system has this right. What they have right is requiring professional development for teachers. But the thing is, I think sometimes that the professional development, and speaking from, I taught high school for 17 years. So I know what it's like to go and sit at a professional development where I'm getting nothing. Nothing. And why am I here? So I think allowing the teachers to choose their professional developments that will, and maybe say, okay, you need to choose one that needs to be focused on promoting more inquiry in your classroom. Choose whatever you want to choose, but this is what we want your focus to be for this summer. Most teachers do their professional development during the summer. So I think maybe more guidance on those professional developments that they do. But also I think it even goes beyond that. So I think it starts with me as a science methods person at the university. I need to look for what is missing. And in the teachers that I am sending out to the world, I need to make sure that I have filled those gaps. One of the gaps that I have found is in informal science education. And informal science education are things like museums, going to the fire department, field trips, informal science education, going to nature centers. These are great tools that we can use. And one of the things that I had my students do, I developed a partnership between Peoria Playhouse, which is here in Peoria. It's a children's museum, children's science STEM museum.
Yeah, I know it.
And my students actually developed a curriculum on the energy grid. And the first year, they actually went out and taught field trips there. But it wasn't just teaching the field trip. They had to relate it to the curriculum, the standards for the state of Illinois, and how it was applicable. And then they had to assess what those children learned in terms of cognitively, how did they grow? In terms of behavior, how did they grow?
I'm here. Do you hear me?
Okay. Yes, I can hear you. I just can't see you.
That's okay. I'll get my camera back.
Okay. But I mean, they had to really think, why am I doing this field trip? Why did this teacher have these students come here? Why is that field trip occurring? And so I think that is a really good tool. That was a huge gap we had. So many times field trips are just seen as playtime. Well, playtime with purpose is what it needs to be. And so that was a huge gap that we had. And then of course, I've already talked about how teaching through inquiry was extremely important.
Right. Do you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
So you're still here. So good. So yeah, I always imagined that I'm gonna put you on, put me on the webcam. There I am.
There you go. I can see you now.
It's not as good as my nice 35 millimeter, but it'll do. So I have this really weird fantasy, and I did this a lot. I had a Boy Scout unit for a while, and I had some young Marines, and I loved doing nature kind of surveys where we go around with nets and capture things.
Oh, yeah.
I get to see if I had an ideal future, I'd have a pith helmet and a canoe and a bunch of kids on an expedition. Yeah. And we'd be like, try to find examples, like the old naturalists did, of all the flora and fauna of this riverbed, right?
Right.
And then we'll bring it back to the classroom and we'll study it and we'll catalog it, right?
Right.
To me, that's just such great science, just to understand what's going on under the rocks, in the soil, in the trees. Right. And photograph the birds, maybe catch a few, and they even had us when I was a kid. We did the whole thing they probably don't do anymore, where they actually get the butterflies and pin them on the wax.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
but it's probably too inhumane
Good
now.
old insect collections.
Insect collections, right? But
Don't ask my former biology students about that, because some of them really hated it, and I had mothers who had beetles in their freezer for years, anticipation of them coming to my class.
see, I as a boy, I think some girls love it too.
Yeah, they do.
I
I
loved
loved it.
that. And my second grade teacher, Miss Libano, I'll never forget. She had built for our classroom that year a terrarium. I keep bringing back terrariums, but and it was. I remember when she got the hermit crab, and she had chameleons in there, and it was like a big drama every day. Where's the chameleon? Did he die? You know? Oh, I found him.
Yeah.
He's blue. He's brown today, and it was a big. It was just wonderful. And we talked, you and I, about how I thought it was kind of strange as an adult now myself. I find that as adults, we kind of put boxes around ourselves and say, this is the adult world I must live in. And the world of terrariums and aquariums and aviaries and having pet birds and exotic animals, that's for children to want, but not for adults to want, right? And I'm like, why am I doing that? My kids are grown up. What's stopping me from having a terrarium or a pet parakeet?
Right.
And you were telling me, you and your husband, I know your husband, and he tell the world what he collects. It's amazing.
So he collects everything under the sun that's alive. Peacocks, pheasants, button quail. He has a huge button quail population, and we even have a parakeet in the house. And I mean, we have all kinds of animals. It's like a living zoo. My husband retired 2 years ago, and from a career as a poultry reproductive physiologist. And ever since then, he has just really, our farm has really grown. Definitely.
Right. Yeah, and the birds especially. It's just amazing how many animals he's collected, and I think that even seeing kids getting to see how they can live as adults is interesting to me. Like not just seeing what scientists look like, but what other adults look like. What you could have as an adult. You could have you continue to have pets. You could live in different strange areas. Oh, my camera's coming back to life again. Okay. I'm gonna turn this and see what happens if I do that. And I'm going to go back to, so I have two cameras here. I have a different setup here. So let's see if I can go back to that and what happens.
Yep, back to you. Yay.
The guy goes to sleep and wakes back up.
Yeah.
So
but you were talking though about, are all of our animals and things. It's kind of like, he's become a big kid again. But what's really interesting is all of our neighbors, when they have friends over, they all come over to our house to see our farm and see all the different kinds of animals, because we have such unique things in there, all different kinds of pheasants, and they all come. It's like they brought 30 of their family members over the other day just to see all of our animals.
Yeah, and I think that you're an extreme example, but I think you're definitely the other pendulum from, like I was saying before the show started, I think 99% of humans' existence on the planet, probably way more than that, was around animals. And the normal was there were animals all around you, right? Maybe too many animals. But we've, in the past 3,000 years, 2,000 years, 1,000 years, we've kind of systematically cut all animals out of our existence. Now people are bringing back plants in their house and things like that and controlling it. But it seems to me that something was lost in that connection with nature. And I think it relates to science and a curiosity about the world other than the world you buy and the stuff you live, the house you live in with all the stuff you've bought. Because it's a little too organized. I think that there's a chaos to life that gives it the right kind of rhythm to how everything works.
Right.
So there may be something to that. I'm just speculating out loud right now, but I envy your position. I think that I would have liked to be a teacher of teachers, and I think that you have a lot of. I ask you these hard questions because there's a lot on your plate and a lot of responsibility you have. Right? The world is asking a lot of you. Is it fair? Should we be asking a lot of you?
Oh, definitely. I ask for it. That's why I have this job. I absolutely love it. I love to get that group of fresh new pre-service teachers and try to help impact them so they can go out and impact the world. I see that as my goal, and it's my duty and responsibility. I mean, I take it to heart. And every student that's in my class knows that, first of all, that I love them and that I want them to be the best teacher that they can be. And that was even when I was a high school teacher. I was the same way. But I want you to find your pathway that makes you a successful teacher, because if you don't feel successful going out there, when you get out there, you're going to fall, because that first year is the turnaround year. And so if I do not give them enough practice with proper tools for teaching, then I have failed in my job. So when I mean, I have students who go out and in their first year teaching will call me and say, Dr. McDaniel, I was thinking about doing this, this, and this. What do you think? Or Dr. McDaniel, we did this activity in class. Can you tell me again what it was? And so, you know, we have that connection. I think it's important as a professor that of education that our connection with our students doesn't stop when they get the grade in the course. It needs to continue beyond.
Right.
I think that way we build successful teachers too, which
Right.
is extremely important. I mean, I teach other classes other than science methods. So, I mean, I have English teachers, history teachers, you know, come to me as well for, you know, different solutions. And I think creating that open communication with professors, which sometimes does not exist. They do not communicate with their students other than lecture. But I think in education, you don't find that a lot. I think we really, you know, we really work with our students to try to make them the best teachers they can be.
Yeah, I think that properly understood, academia should be, especially academics teaching teachers,
right?
Is that your project is building and sustaining civilization.
Right.
I mean,
there you go.
You are. And so,
wow.
and the reason why I say that is because I think that, and people like Jordan Peterson have been talking about this, about how, why are people falling into a bottle, for instance? They're falling into a bottle because they don't have, they don't have the adventure in their life. They're not living their mission. So they're falling into a bottle or to addiction. When, especially men, but I'm sure it's women too, men will join the Marine Corps and be willing to storm a beach for a mission, right? But if you take a mission away from a young man, it's a sad case study, right?
Right.
So I think these people who have all these abilities that can go to ADM, I always say ADM because they're down the street, or Caterpillar, they can make all this money. If you tell them, sure, the money is there, right? But is that where your adventure is? What is your adventure? Do you want something? Do you want to do something hard and significant and change the shape of the world? You don't have to, but you can if you want to be a teacher. You can do it.
Right.
And I think that might diffuse the whole poverty fear, right? And we should start. We should also start paying them more. But I think,
definitely.
Yeah, but I think that I'd like to properly elevate what you do, and I think what you do, properly understood, is we are building civilization, and we take it for granted. We take, I think, to a dangerous extent, we take all this stuff for granted.
Right. I agree. I agree with you. Highlighting a student that I have, that as you were talking about this, I was thinking about him. He's a student who came to me as a freshman, and I won't say his name, but he came to me as a freshman and had just such great promises, really inquisitive. He was a music education major. I was an entry-level field experience course he took under me at first, and then he took another course under me and another course, and I actually hired him for the STEM Center, and he switched to middle school science, and he's a music major as well, double major. He has done research with me before. We went to Burlington, Vermont to present our research, and now he's actually leaving to go to Copenhagen in the fall to do study abroad at the educational system and in Copenhagen, and eventually he's going to go and get a master's degree and will be PhD, and he will be one of our great educators. I know without a shadow of a doubt. And I think that is like if you could say, okay, you're going to put a check, I did something good there, recognizing that student early and giving him the opportunities to blossom. I didn't really do anything other than give him opportunities, and he ran with it.
How do you replicate that? How do you replicate?
I think I think it's a way that you have to recognize that in students. And I mean, I have looked for other students like him since then, and he hasn't graduated yet. He'll graduate another year, but trying to get those students and mold them and shape them and give them the opportunities. And they're rare. Students like that are rare, who will go beyond something that is not required for a course. You know, and so I think we as high school, or I'm not high school anymore, as college professors, we really have to pick and choose those students and give them those opportunities. Now, knowing that when I give opportunities, I give them out to the whole class, not just to one student, but that student grasps onto it. Because I think we can't isolate those students either. We don't need to say, oh, you're my little pet and you're going to be the one that I bring up through the ranks. You can't do that. I think you really need to make everything open to all, and then see who takes. And that's kind of, what I've been doing with different projects and things that I do on campus. Right now, I have 2 students who are working out at Northwoods Mall every Saturday for a STEM event. And I have University of Illinois, Caterpillar Women Engineering, the Nutrition and Wellness place here at Bradley are going on Saturdays, and they're setting up STEM events. And they're for K through 12 or even adults. And I know next Saturday they're having a Tesla coil. So that's going to be really loud, but really cool out at the mall. And, I have these 2 middle school science majors who are out there, and they are getting to see all this exposure and experience with people and trying to teach them in an informal setting. And so that's a great experience for them. So, just trying to find those students who are interested in going above and beyond the classroom. And I know those will make excellent teachers. Definitely.
It seems like a tragedy, and it sounds dramatic, but hear me out. We know that these big tech firms like Twitter and Facebook and Google, they put so many billions of dollars into psychoanalyzing all of us and knowing all of our patterns for what they should put in front of our face to sell us whatever crap they want to sell us, right? Whatever we mention gets put right in front of our face again to buy it, right?
Right.
They know so much about us. Yet we don't ask them, our senators and congressmen, that we say we want to maybe take away their monopoly, blah, blah, blah. Why don't we just say to them, could you help us find teachers? You find people buy everything. Could you identify with all your beautiful algorithms? Could you find the next great scientists, the next people who should be doctors and researchers and teachers and whatever? I know they can. They could probably do it better than anybody. It seems like we're not. They always say like, well, we went to the moon. Yeah, look at what it took to go to the moon. All this beautiful concerted effort. I don't see the same concerted effort to do things like find the next great teachers. It seems medieval. Like let's do a thing at the mall and see who's interested in teaching. It's like, wow, I bet we can do better than that because we have that shiny thing over there that does things like magic, right?
Right. The thing is, it's really, really hard to find an algorithm for the heart. And I really, truly think that teaching is a heart thing. The best teachers are the ones who truly have bought into it. And that's really hard to identify.
Sure.
I mean, I have some who I think, oh my gosh, they have drank the Kool-Aid. They are going to be the ones who are going to be the excellent teachers. And then I'll have them for 2 or 3 or 4 classes. And I'm like, oh no, they're not. I'm going to have to really work with them to make them, really good. So,
well, maybe
it's interesting. It would be good if they could do that. Definitely.
Well, maybe it's, another powerful thing. And Joseph Stalin always said, if I had Hollywood, I'd rule the world. Right.
That's right.
And so it seems like when you have a Mr. Chips or when Robin Williams played, My Captain, when he was, movies like that, I bet spiked graduation classes of teachers 20 years later, 50, because that drove people to teaching. We're not seeing that as much lately. These inspirational movies and shows about, teaching. Do you agree, or am I wrong there?
I do agree, but what my great hope is that with the onset of COVID and the world going through this COVID experience and seeing how valuable our teachers are, I think that their profession has been lifted up a little bit. And so I'm hoping that we will see a spike from that and that people will want to go into that profession again and not see it as something that's menial, something that is admirable is what we're looking for. And so I'm hoping, when we have these huge events that happen in life, I think, we will see it. I think give another 1 to 2 years, we're going to see a pretty good spike.
Yeah, I think that COVID has been a good disruption in a lot of ways. I agree with you.
And maybe it'll be science because that's what COVID is. It's all science. So maybe it will be science.
Yeah. Okay. If you had the last 5 minutes, if you had one more thing you want to tell the world that we need to build the civilization, what would it be? To your fellow peers in teaching STEM education, what would that bit of knowledge be, that wisdom that you've found? And you've shared a lot of it already, so maybe you've already shared it. But here's your cigarette, and you've got your last thing to say. What's it going to be?
Well, I think it needs to be that we all need to work together. I think that it's really important that we have discussions like these, that we all know what we're all thinking, and that we can get together and create this this world in which people want to go into science, and people want to teach science, and people want to go into STEM fields. So it's really not just about science teaching, it's about STEM fields as well. And we need to figure out a way to create these opportunities. And I think creating those opportunities begins with the way in which we teach, starting in the elementary, so that we can make science fun, but not just fun, that we can make it applicable and people can see themselves as scientists. I think that's the huge vision. When you have somebody who lives in rural Noxapater County in Mississippi and has never left Mississippi, how can they never left their county, maybe even their town? How can they become an engineer? Well, you have that little teacher who is in that town, and he's teaching, about how to rebuild a carburetor in the VOTEC. Well, from that student says, okay, I can rebuild a carburetor. Maybe I can build something that's different than a carburetor and make the engine even better. And so from that, then the teacher says, okay, well, let's go talk to so-and-so at, this university, and let's see if we can find a way for you to do what you love, but do it in a way so you can get a degree and you can become an engineer. So I think we all have to work together. We have to have these connections. If we don't have these connections, then we are very limiting of our students. And so that's kind of, I think, in the realm of STEM. I think sometimes we just throw money at it to create robots. To me, that seems to be the big push right now, but that's really not what STEM is all about. It's about making those connections, and it's about allowing those students to grow and explore. And if creating a robot is what makes them explore, that's great. But maybe you also have this person over here who wants to go out and do an archaeological dig, and they don't have any opportunity to do that. So create that opportunity for them. You can, as a professor, I can write research grants to provide these opportunities for these students in these areas. I think that's really important that we do that as well. So I think it's just being active and not just sitting back and waiting for things to happen, because they're not going to. You have to be out there and active and find those gaps and try to fill them and find people to support you in filling them. I mean, I have great support through my community, through Caterpillar, through Bradley, of course, through Peoria Playhouse. We have Wildlife Prairie Park out here, the Illinois Math Academy. There's many different places that help support what I do. So I think as an education professor, finding those community members that can help support you with whatever your visions are, and so that you can make that impact as well. So.
Yeah, I love what you said. And what you never really mentioned once was quizzes, textbooks, and testing. And state tests and the ISATs and the IGAPs and the SATs and the ACTs. Why didn't you mention all those?
Because really in the long run, they do very little for us. I think it's more in the application of what you have learned. That's where real learning comes, and being able, like I said, to transfer it to real world problems. Now, I think that assessments and things like that have a place. I mean, just my feeling is the place is for the teacher to figure out where their students are at in the content knowledge, but not in the application of the knowledge. I mean, it's really hard to make an assessment that's a traditional assessment, like a standardized test, that can really test the true, it's not even knowledge, the true understanding that someone has of that knowledge.
Maybe a portfolio based or an oral presentation of the skills they learned,
exactly, or a model or a presentation, or a project that they have brought all these different areas into. That's so much more we know that they understand what they're doing when we do that, and that's difficult for some students, and that's a whole nother talk for another time about collaborative work. But
well, yeah, you could be. I think this subject I brought up at the I think requires honesty, because you could say to a parent who might be thinking, well, how is my kid going to go to U of I if in 6th grade he didn't do this, that, and the other? So, well, you could say to the parent, what do you remember what you did in 6th grade? Did you start a recycling project? Did you learn about microorganisms with your bare hands and do what your son did? Right. I said he might have done poorly on this part of the IGAP test, but he also went to county with his science project. There's I think people understand there are achievements, right? And I think that there's a kind of a dishonesty about it, saying, well, it's all about the testing because it proves learning happened. Really? What did you learn in 6th grade? Show me your tests.
Right. Right. And I think we need to go away from giving what I call participation grades and going more to looking at what the outcomes are and the growth of that student. I think
Right.
that's more important. I think we have to do A, B, C, D, E, F, whatever scheme of grading, but really I would like to see percentage of growth. I think that I think as an educator, that's what I look more at with my students in college is how much they have grown in whatever they're doing.
How do you demonstrate it? Is it through pre-test, post-test? Or how do you demonstrate that
Well,
scientifically?
I believe that would be by output of product, by whatever I'm having them do,
Okay.
and having really good rubrics, which people don't like rubrics, but rubrics are very good if they are drawn correctly, looking
Mhm.
at the goals of what you have for them and have they met those goals? Have
Right.
they met them, or are they just knocked them out of the park? And I think through that you can show more growth, and you can really tell the students more what they need to work on. A lot of times I was at a teacher um, down south of here at her class, a fifth grade math class, and she has a sheet she gives to the students, says these are your goals for the 9 weeks, and whenever you get through mastering that goal, you're going to check off that goal. And so it made the students invest into their learning. Okay, I know these are what she expects me to do, and then she gave them all kinds of tasks and things and projects and things to do to meet those goals. So maybe that is the way we report whether or not a student is successful in the class or not. Maybe it's just meeting those goals.
Hmm.
I don't know.
Yeah. No, and I think that you get the freak out panic mode when you say, well, look what the Chinese and the Koreans and the Taiwanese are doing. They're killing us. They're killing
Yeah,
us.
Finland. Yeah,
Or the Finns. And I know I have lots
Yeah.
of Finnish friends. And my Finnish friends tell me, we're not as good as you guys keep saying we are.
yes, they are. They're really good.
They are good, yeah, but they're like, there's a little bit of propaganda going on because we have problems in our classrooms too. So they don't want to be. They're very humble people. You know what one person told me about the Finns? It was one of my shows. I think he said it. He said he was Hungarian. He went to Finland. He has your job. He teaches STEM teachers at a university. And Christoph, he said the thing that taught me the most as a Hungarian about how they succeeded in Finland. It wasn't what they're teaching in the schools. It was the Finnish cultural or societal tick of making kids do it themselves. He saw a Finnish parent and they were going to go out and the kid hadn't tied his shoes and they waited and wouldn't leave until he had tied his shoes. He said most Americans, Hungarian parents would eventually just tie their kid's shoe because they wanted to go.
Right, right.
That's not a Finnish thing.
Yeah.
And he goes, and that relates to the school. They will wait because they know it's important. It's about the kid and getting that thing. So he that was his anecdote about. You want to know about Finland? Let me tell you about Finland. It's about tying shoes. It's about. He boiled it down to that.
That's a good analogy.
Yeah, yeah. About no participation grade. You got to tie your shoe. So, but we do get this panic mode about like, why are we getting killed in STEM by all these other countries? And what's your take on that? Because we are the seat of some of the greatest research in the world, medical research, so much research in America. All these beautiful rockets we're landing now like pencils. Why do we kill it? It seems like at the one end, but our schools look like crap on the other. What is it an unfair? Is it an unfair comparison to look at other countries and us, or what's fair about it?
Well, I don't think it's unfair. I think because the only way we grow as a nation in education is by looking at other models that are out there that are working. Now, will that model work for us? It might not. I mean, they have a lot of infrastructure in place to make their educational models work the way they work, and to build that, on a nationwide level might not be successful. But I think we need to look at pockets of that. There are areas, there are schools that are trying to teach by these more inquiry-based models. So I think it's going to be, I think in America, we need to look at the community that we're in, see the tools that we have, and use those tools to make the education better. I think doing something nationwide is just, it's not going to be successful, especially when you look at areas that do not have as much resources as others. They have to deal with the resources that they have.
Right.
Still does not mean they cannot do good science. You look at, in Arkansas, there's a very rural school that has maybe 100 kids in the high school, and of those 100 kids, about 20 of them go to International Science and Engineering Fair. And my numbers are probably exaggerated, but from this rural school, that has no money, they create these big, huge projects to go and win at an international level. So it's there. I think we just have to have the buy-in for it in our area and the support.
I just spoke to a man named Philippe Longchamp. He won Teacher of the Year in Sweden, and he won it because he won it first in South Korea. The South Koreans awarded him the Teacher of the Year because of the science project he brought there. They have this big tech competition in South Korea. Usually China dominates; they get definitely the gold medal, but no other European or Americans come in second or third.
Wow!
Sweden got silver. Okay, his kids. And so when that happened, the lens of the world turned to him, especially in Sweden, turned to him like, what are you doing in your Montessori school that got these Swedish kids to South Korea and won the silver? And the way he teaches tech is from a historical lens. It's all student-directed, student kind of led learning, okay, and inquiry-based. But he teaches from a historical perspective. So they work their way up from the Greeks to the Romans to like catapults to trebuchets in the Middle Ages, and he has them recapitulate these scientific innovations as they go, right? So they get until they get to robotics and things like that. So they've learned all these principles in the context of how they were first discovered. That's his way of doing it, okay?
Right.
And but it seemed to bear fruit. Right. And it's like, I love the process of talking to him because I was like, this is what should happen. I should learn what's working in Sweden that killed it in South Korea here in America. Right.
Right.
That's like, and that's what the internet kind of provides us with now is let's find out why they're succeeding and what could be, like you would say, replicatable. Right. In our context. Yeah.
Right. Definitely. And it needs to be, I really think it needs to be on a community basis. It needs to be, supported by, entities, but it needs to be a community basis because we as teachers in the area know what will work in our area and then allowing those teachers the opportunity to explore and try those new things. Like what happened, like you said, in Sweden. That's amazing.
Yeah. So you have hope. You have hope for the world?
I do. I do.
Okay.
Definitely had hope or I wouldn't be in this business for sure.
Yeah, well, Heather and I love you. You know that. We've worked with you a lot in the past, and we're going to work with you in the future. So,
definitely.
And so, thank you again for being with me today. I think it was very fruitful, and you got to come back later on this year and talk to me about your autism project you're doing with Easter seals. You want to mention that real quick? What you do with Easter seals and autism?
Sure. So we are in the process of developing a project with Easter seals, and we have a school of autism here in the Peoria area, and we are going to work with middle school students of autism and try to see if a particular STEM toy, the LuxBlocks toy, if that will promote science inquiry in children with autism. As we know, children with autism suffer from sensory perception issues. And if you give them too many stimuli at one time, they really shut down. And so we are going to see if creating this strategic intervention using LuxBlocks, if that can allow them to be able to do things without having things written out step for step by them, which tends to help people with autism. They tend to do very well with step-by-step instructions, but we want them to be able to break out of that box and be able to create more experiences for themselves and see how creative they can become. And so we're going to work on a building a bridge type of activity for middle school. And so that's coming. Working on writing grant for that right now to get support for that. And then, of course, working with another professor, Dr. Quentin Werfel. He is a special education professor here at Bradley. He and I are going to work together on this. And we're also working with Illinois Math Academy on this as well. So
that's exciting. It sounds like a self-promotion for me. I forgot that LuxBlocks is involved with that one.
Yeah, but, it is.
That's great. And I won't interfere because this is science.
That's
and hopefully it goes our favor, but it's science, so I want it to be scientific. So that's great.
Yes, definitely.
So, well, thank you again for sharing. This is really exciting news. And
thank you for having me.
Absolutely. I'm going to take you off Facebook and just say goodbye to you. But thank you again. And stay tuned next week, you guys, when we have a woman who later in life decided to go back to school and study geology and became an oil wildcatter. You won't want to miss that.
Don't you ever ask them why? If they told you, you would cry. So just look at them and sigh.